You've tried to build a habit before. Maybe it was waking up early, going to the gym, reading more, meditating for just 5 minutes every morning. And for a few days, maybe even a week, it actually worked. Then one day you missed it, then 2 days, then before you knew it, the habit was gone. And you told yourself the same thing you always do. You just don't have enough willpower. But here's what I want you to sit with for the next few minutes. What if willpower was never the problem? What if the entire way we think about habits, the discipline narrative, the just push through it mentality, is actually the thing working against you this whole time? We live in a culture obsessed with willpower. Every self-help book, every productivity guru, every motivational post sends the same message. If you can't stick to a habit, you need more discipline. Try harder. Wake up at 5 a.m. Be more committed. And when it doesn't work, and it usually doesn't, we don't question the advice. We question ourselves. That's the trap. And it's rooted in a fundamental misunderstanding of how the brain actually builds behavior. Welcome to Calm Science. This channel exists because science has a lot to say about the things we struggle with most: sleep, focus, stress, habits. And it doesn't always say what we expect. Today, we're going deep on habits. Not tips, not hacks, the actual neuroscience. Here's what we're covering: why willpower is depletable by design, what the brain actually needs to automate behavior, why most habit advice puts you in a losing position from the start, and what the science says you should do instead. Stay with me, this one shifts things. Start light, the willpower myth. Let's start with something you've probably felt but never questioned. Think about the last time you stuck to something really well. Maybe it was a diet after New Year's, a workout streak in week 1, a new morning routine that felt amazing on day 1. What happened on day 11 when the excitement wore off and it was cold and dark and your bed felt like the greatest place on earth? That's when willpower was supposed to show up. Except it didn't. And there's a very specific biological reason for that. Willpower is not a character trait. It is a cognitive function. And like all cognitive functions, it runs on energy, specifically on glucose and mental bandwidth in the prefrontal cortex, the part of your brain responsible for planning, decision-making, and self-control. Here's the thing about the prefrontal cortex: it gets tired. Researchers call this ego depletion. Every decision, every moment of resisting temptation, every act of self-control draws from the same finite pool. A landmark 2010 study found that people who resisted cookies first performed significantly worse on later persistence tasks. Their willpower was spent, not because they were weak, but because the system was depleted. So if willpower runs out, and it does reliably, how do people ever build lasting habits at all? The answer lives somewhere else in the brain entirely. Go deeper: the basal ganglia and the habit loop. Deep in the center of the brain sits a structure called the basal ganglia. It's ancient, extraordinarily efficient, and almost completely ignored in mainstream habit conversations. While the prefrontal cortex is the slow, thoughtful executive upstairs, the basal ganglia is the fast, automatic operator in the basement. The basal ganglia handles procedural memory, the memory of how to do things, how to ride a bike, how to type without looking at your fingers. Once a behavior is encoded in the basal ganglia, it no longer requires conscious thought. It doesn't require the prefrontal cortex at all. It just runs, automatically, with zero willpower. That is what a habit actually is, not discipline, a program running in the background. The basal ganglia learns through what researchers call the habit loop, A cue triggers a routine, the routine produces a reward, and the brain strengthens that neural pathway every single time the loop completes. Through a process called synaptic potentiation, the brain is literally rewiring itself to make that behavior easier and faster. Here's the problem. Most people try to build habits using the prefrontal cortex through motivation, intention, and willpower. But the basal ganglia doesn't respond to intention, it responds to repetition and reward. Not what you want to do, what you actually do repeatedly in a consistent context. And this is exactly why most habit advice fails. It's targeting the wrong system. But there's something even more specific going on beneath all of this. Something that almost no one talks about when they discuss habits. It has to do with the role of dopamine. Scientific depth. Dopamine prediction error. You've probably heard that dopamine is the pleasure chemical. That's not accurate. Dopamine is a prediction chemical. Neuroscientist Wolfram Schultz discovered in the 1990s that dopamine neurons don't fire when a reward is received. They fire when a reward is anticipated. The brain is always trying to predict what comes next. When a behavior produces an unexpectedly good outcome, dopamine surges. When it produces less than expected, dopamine drops. This is called a prediction error, and it is the engine of behavioral learning. When the reward comes, the brain signals, "Do that again." But, and this is critical, the reward has to come quickly after the behavior for the brain to connect them. If the reward is too distant, like the health benefits of exercise that show up months from now, the dopamine signal is weak. The loop doesn't strengthen, the habit doesn't form. This is why habits built on distant outcomes are so fragile. Your brain does not speak the language of future me, it speaks the language of right now. Research from behavioral economist Katie Milkman at the University of Pennsylvania tested what she called temptation bundling, pairing a pleasurable activity like listening to a favorite audiobook only while working out. The result? People exercised significantly more. The immediate reward created a strong dopamine loop. The habit formed because the brain got what it needed, a reliable, immediate signal to repeat the behavior. Now, there's one final layer here, and it's the one that most habit science leaves out entirely. It happens before you ever attempt the behavior. It's the environment. Environment design. The Vietnam experiment. In the 1970s, a remarkable natural experiment unfolded. Around 15% of US soldiers serving in Vietnam were using heroin regularly. When the Nixon administration learned this, they expected a wave of returning addicts. It didn't happen. Researcher Lee Robbins found that 95% of those soldiers simply stopped using after coming home, without rehab, without therapy. What changed? The environment. The cues that triggered the drug-seeking behavior, the stress of combat, the social context, the availability, were gone. And without the cue, the habit loop couldn't activate. The behavior stopped. This is context-dependent memory. Your brain stores habits attached to the environments where they were formed. This means your kitchen counter, your desk, your commute. These are all cue landscapes that either activate or suppress specific habit loops. When you try to build a new habit in an unchanged environment, you are competing against dozens of existing loops the basal ganglia has already encoded. You are not starting fresh. You are fighting for neural real estate in a crowded system. The behavioral science here is very clear. Reduce friction for the behavior you want. Increase friction for the behavior you don't. Put your running shoes by the door. Charge your phone in a different room. Put healthy food at eye level. These are not tricks. They are environmental design principles rooted in how the basal ganglia responds to cues. You're not changing your willpower. You're changing the inputs to the system that actually runs your behavior. Here's what I really want you to take from today. The way most of us have been taught to think about habits and about ourselves when habits fall apart is based on a model of the human being that isn't accurate. The model says you have a will and you either use it or you don't. You either have discipline or you lack it. You either have what it takes or you don't. But your brain isn't a moral character test. It is a prediction machine. It is constantly scanning for patterns, for cues, for expected outcomes. It was not designed to sustain effort through intention alone. It was designed to automate behaviors that are repeated in consistent environments with reliable rewards. That is its function. That is what it is extraordinarily good at. So the next time a habit falls apart, and eventually one will, I want you to resist the old story. Instead, ask, what was the cue? What was the reward? What did the environment make easy, and what did it make hard? Because the answers to those questions will tell you more than any amount of self-blame ever could. You are not broken. You are predictable. And predictable is something you can work with. Building habits isn't about becoming a different person through force of will. It's about understanding the person you already are and designing systems that work with your brain rather than against it. That is not weakness. That is the beginning of real, lasting change. Before we close, I genuinely want to hear from you. Think about a habit you've tried to build and failed at. Now, looking back with what we've covered today, was it a willpower problem, or was it a cue problem, a reward timing problem, or an environment problem? Drop your answer in the comments. I read every single one. If this episode gave you a different way of seeing yourself and your habits, that's what Calm Science is built for. We break down the science behind the things that shape your daily life, without the noise, without the hype. If you want more of that, come join the Calm Science community. Hit subscribe, and I'll see you in the next one.